Okay. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today's discussion is called Where Are All the White Voices? And I'm joined here by an illustrious panel of writers and academics. Welcome all, and thanks for coming. Now, before we begin, I'll quickly introduce myself. As many of you may know, I'm Jonathan Harris, Chief Executive of the Diversity and Arts Funding Trust, DAFT, and we have collaborated here with We All Need Diversity, WAND, to bring you this urgent event. Now, please do tweet about the event under hashtag Where Are All the White Voices or hashtag Daft Voices. So let's begin. I'll start with George Sanderson, a promising emerging writer who has been writing for... How long have you been writing for now, George?
15 years now.
15 years. Wow. Now, George was born to Anglo-Saxon parents who owned a dairy farm in rural Suffolk. After an incredibly lucky set of circumstances, he ended up writing a novel at the age of only 23. Thanks for joining us, George.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Next, we have Bilal Ansari, who is nothing less than a powerhouse. Bilal is the founder and director of Cup of Tea, where he works with young white people, giving them access to platforms that they have been denied. Thank you for making time for us, Bilal.
My pleasure.
Then we have Professor Ella Savenso, Professor of Creative Writing and Literature at Oxford University and author of the definitive history to white literature over the last 100 years, White Words, Writing Back from the Margins. Ella recently announced the Write Back Scholarship Programme, especially for impoverished non-melanated people in the UK. How has that been going, Ella?
Well, things are moving slowly, but change will come. I firmly believe, in fact, that everyone has a voice.
Of course, and we must return to that. But for now, moving on, we're very privileged to have with us Nikki Miller. She needs no introduction. We're lucky to catch her. She's a very busy lady. And Nikki is the author of 4 novels, and her latest, The Lady in the Attic, has received widespread acclaim and won several prizes, including the Looker. It's been celebrated for, amongst many things, its inclusion of a significant Caucasian character. Welcome, Nikki. It's great to see you again, looking lovely as always. The last time we met was at the Looker Prize after party. I imagine life has changed a bit for you since then.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thank you for sending these lovely flowers. Yes, my life has changed a bit, but luckily I've got friends and families around me who keeps me grounded.
Well, we're happy to have you here on the ground with us. And last but not least, our youngest speaker today, Katie Thompson. Now, Katie's first collection of Insta poetry, We Were Once Queens, was published, in fact, by Cup of Tea. It was a bestseller. Now, Katie has over 100,000 followers on Instagram, and people say she's been breaking new ground with the representation of diverse voices.
Thank you for inviting me, Jonathan. I'm chuffed to be here.
And we're chuffed to have you. And you're creating a lot of excitement already. Twitter is a buzz, but let's start with Bilal. In a sense, the man behind creating the phenomenon that is Katie Thompson. Tell us a bit about the work you do, Bilal.
Well, at Cup of Tea, we mentor young beach writers, giving them the support and encouragement they so desperately need.
Now, Beach, of course, stands for British, European, American, Australian, Caucasian habitants.
Yes, it's a mouthful, but it's just about making it easier to monitor diversity. As for Katie, we are so proud of her. We came across her on Instagram, and seeing how popular she is, we knew we had a ready-made audience to tap into.
And you also produce plays, right?
We do. Our plays are based on interviews from members of the beach community. We champion their rights, and we believe the way forward is for their stories to be told in their words by us.
You were successful, weren't you, in obtaining the Mughal Court grant last year for the important work that you do?
Yes, and thanks for all your support with that, Jonathan. We're very lucky that in this time of cutbacks, DAFT recognises the value of our work.
My wife and I went to see your last play, published, and thoroughly enjoyed it.
We were floored by the positive reception to that one. It was lucky, of course, that White Lives Matter took off just around the same time after the murder of Philip Green.
Published, as many of you listening might know, centres around white people in their own habitat.
Yes, exactly. You see, the pub is usually seen through such a racist lens. We don't normally go into those places imagining all kinds of seedy, violent, terrible things happening there. But if you actually go into a pub, you can see that it's just white people talking about their families, drinking alcohol, and eating some, it has to be said, very delicious food. I was fortunate enough to be writer in residence at the Prince of Wales. Every day for 6 months, we went there, we interviewed them and observed them. We watched football matches, listened to live music. They have this tradition of tribute bands, which is quite entertaining. Of course, we had some trepidation entering the space, the stories you hear and all, but there was no hostility, only curiosity. And hopefully the play shows that pubs aren't the scary places we all imagine them to be. They're magical, colourful places, teeming with drama and stories. In fact, did you know that pub is short for public house? Their culture is one of peace, actually.
See, I was surprised to find the play was actually quite funny.
They're funny people. You wouldn't know it from the news media, but they're very good at jokes. And by the way, we had a good number of white people in the audience too, although we're still working on outreach to increase those numbers.
It makes economic sense as well, doesn't it, to tell these stories? The white population is only growing in this country after all. It's becoming more and more obvious that connecting with diverse audiences is necessary for the survival of the arts.
Precisely. If we carry on ignoring them, we're missing out on a crucial demographic.
Enter George. Now, George, you've been very successful, haven't you, in giving a voice to diverse communities, drawing on your personal experiences. But you weren't always so interested in reading and writing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Firstly, though, can I just say I'm really happy to be here, just part of such an illustrious panel. I'd never have imagined that one day I'd be on the same panel with all of you. It's great.
You're very welcome.
So to answer your question, no, I hadn't always been interested in books, but when I discovered them, it was a revelation. Books, they're not very common where I come from, unfortunately. There's not much culture in general. Most people in our communities, they live in very isolated enclaves. They tend to speak just to each other. They play golf and bingo, hang around in pubs. They listen to quite this obscure, strange music, Ed Sheeran and Coldplay. There's just not really an interest in integrating into wider society. Me, I was always a bit different. My friends and family, they used to call me a mince pie when I was growing up. Quite a
I'm sorry, a what?
A mince pie. Yeah, you know, pale on the outside, brown on the inside. Not come across that? That's well, I'm afraid that's what they call you in non-melanated communities when you're not a typical white person, when you want more from life. You see, I wanted to get out. I wanted to see the wider world. I wanted to fall in love. But my parents didn't understand me. They didn't get that. They wanted me to settle down with a nice traditional white girl and take over the dairy farm. That was their idea.
And now have they let go of their wish to get you married off to a white girl?
Well, I'm afraid they don't have a choice. I was fortunate enough to meet the girl of my dreams at a conference a couple of years ago, Amara. She's tuning in now from the other room, in fact. I was ready to fight everyone to be with her. She just got me in a way that my own community never could, never did. And she just helped me let go of their thinking and really find my own way.
Oh, that's a very touching story. Thank you, George. Now we'll come back to you, but for now, Professor Ella Cervenzo, you're the Director of Literature and Creative Writing at Oxford, where more and more people are speaking of a diversity problem.
Yes, Jonathan, as we know, the representation of minorities in academia in general is quite appalling. And we at Oxford, we're at the forefront of addressing this issue.
Now, why do you think such few beach people go to university, especially to places like Shoxford?
The reasons are complex, Jonathan. First of all, there are barriers, of course, within their own communities. They attach all sorts of stigmas to higher education based on perhaps local traditions and customs. And then, as George said, they have a lack of a reading culture. Now, if you don't have these basic skills, if your parents don't have books around the house, if you've never even heard of, say, Ibn Incha or Zora Neale Hurston, then what chance do you have? They often prefer to move in more vocational directions. They're practical people, They have to be. What use is a university degree in, say, a microbrewery or an artisan coffee shop? And finally, of course, there's a lack of knowledge around how to apply and so on, or confidence even. We're taking all this very seriously at the university.
How are you tackling these challenges?
Well, one of the ways, Jonathan, is through our scholarship programme, Writing Back. Now, there's absolutely no reason, Jonathan, why a young white person with education and training can't achieve just as much as any normal person. And so we take these children and we teach them, the building blocks of what has made up great literature over the centuries. And they come out, I've seen this with my own eyes, they come out with the confidence and skills to really make a mark. And this is what I meant when I said, Jonathan, everyone has a voice.
That's amazing. But for some people, it's just not enough, is it? We've seen recently in the media that students have been campaigning to decolonize university curriculums, demanding more books by white writers, more white teachers.
I think it's wonderful, Jonathan, that young white people these days are so passionate. But change is not going to happen overnight. I mean, we've been invited here by Wand, who are doing an amazing job. There's no magic wand that's going to bring about change just like that. We're talking about centuries of catching up. I mean, do these white lecturers, do they even exist? Are these books by white writers even out there?
Literature is out there. Young people like me are writing and publishing books. All this be patient and change will happen slowly isn't going to work anymore.
I understand, darling. I do. But we can't lose sight of quality over pleasing people. I mean, there's a reason why we're still teaching the classics. Students need to develop a solid foundation before they broaden their horizons to include white literature as well.
Not forgetting the existing lecturers. What would happen to their jobs?
Precisely, Jonathan. I mean, many of our lecturers at Soxford come from a long line of thinkers and scholars who've dedicated their lives to the protection of knowledge.
Now, when the students call for radical change, what do you think they want? Do they even know? Or do they just want to burn the place up, burn down all of the universities?
Of course they know what they want.
We'll come to you shortly, Kaylee. Let's have a respectful discussion. Let's wait for our turn and let's give others a chance to speak, right? Professor Spencer.
I believe, Jonathan, that more and more there is a breakdown of trust. These young white people, they're only speaking to each other.
Yes, there is an alarming rise in identity politics these days.
I mean, the truth is, Jonathan, there's no need for people to create these little segregated pockets within, what do they call them? Safe spaces.
Yeah, I haven't really got my head around the idea. I mean, if the university isn't a safe space, what is?
Our universities, Jonathan, come from a long and proud history as spaces where academics and students can express themselves freely, challenge views, cultivate minds. I want these young white people to know that our doors are open to them. No need for all this hopelessness and despair. Because that is what happens, Jonathan, in these safe spaces. At best, this is what happens, if you know what I mean. We all know that these spaces become breeding grounds for other things.
Thank you, Ella. That's an important message. Now, Katie, I can see you're keen to speak. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about your journey. How did you become a writer?
Well, firstly, I'd like to say to Professor Savenzo that I don't agree. We don't feel welcome at universities. We feel silenced, like we have nothing to contribute. Universities and schools are melanated institutions. The entire time I was studying, no one told me the truth about our history, how our land was invaded, our ancestors killed off. Instead, we were taught that our country was discovered, that melanins saved us. All of my real education happened outside of school and uni, on social media.
Okay, thanks for that, Katie. To get back to the question, how did you become a writer?
Well, it's connected. As I was saying, I wasn't told about my history at school or uni, or even at home. My parents just wanted us to fit in, not to draw too much attention to ourselves. Maybe George will relate. Anyway, as I started reading, learning the truth about my people, connecting my roots and my identity, I discovered just how rich my culture is, how brave my ancestors have been. I came across long-forgotten Anglo-Saxon writers like Chaucer and Shakespeare, and their writing is full of magic and mystery and wisdom. Before, I didn't even know that white people wrote books. So I guess I started writing a few lines each day, sharing photos along the way to chart my journey, and recreating photos of my grandparents, like dressing in kilts, holding a chicken, churning butter, things like that, and writing little pieces of poetry too. I couldn't believe the response. It was shared like crazy. Then Bilal approached me, asked me if I was interested in publishing a book. The truth is, I'd never even really thought about it.
It can't hurt, I imagine, that you look the way you do, posing in those exotic clothes.
Are you slut-shaming me?
Far from it. I find it absolutely charming.
I realised I had something special with Katie. She was a ready-made package, so outspoken and brave. My favourite poem by her is called Nan's Juicy Roast Dinners.
I remember that one going viral. Now, let's continue this conversation, but for now, I want to turn to Nikki. Nikki, I was one of your biggest champions on the Looker Prize judging panel. Lady in the Attic is a remarkable State of the Nation novel. You've always been quite aware of this underrepresentation issue, haven't you? There have been white characters in every novel that you've written, but in this last one, at a time where there's so much noise about diversity, you decided to make one of your main characters white. Can you tell us about why you thought this was important?
To be honest with you, Jonathan, I didn't see it as doing diversity. I was simply writing a novel that reflects the world around me. And the world isn't just made up of melanated people, is it? Non-melanated people exist too, and we can't continue ignoring them. I've personally interacted with non-melanated people all my life. School, college, post office, even in my own house. Our nanny and our housekeepers were white, for instance. My mom tells me I used to follow them around with a pen in my hand, writing down whatever they said, capturing their unique dialects and intonations. The inclusion of Samantha, a white main character, wasn't just obvious, it was necessary.
Yeah, there has, however, been a bit of a Twitter backlash, hasn't there?
Oh, it's ridiculous.
Someone called Amanda Jones seems to be leading the campaign. Is it all right if I read out some of her tweets so people get an idea?
Of course, Jonathan. I mean, if we don't champion freedom of speech, then we're no better than them, are we?
So Amanda Jones says, Samantha spends the entire novel getting pissed, counting calories, knitting Christmas jumpers, and doing VAT scams to raise money for a holiday in Ibiza. She panders to every white stereotype there is. There's hardly any representation of white people in the media as it is, and in the few that exist, there's always some reference to white-collar crime, as if there's something inherently criminal in us. Now, this kind of criticism seems to be calling for censorship, essentially. How did it feel to be attacked like that?
I won't lie, it's been hard. I was terrified at first. I even had to call the police at one point. They were so helpful and supportive. And luckily, my publisher, he stood by me, even though there were calls to ban the book. And my good friend, John Lee, another revered journalist, well, he wrote about the whole thing in The Custodian. But really, most of the time, I tried to ignore petty criticism. After all, this is literature. Is that so hard to understand? I'm a writer, not a sociologist.
And surely it can't be denied that these things happen.
Exactly. The truth is, Samantha's character wasn't even made up. Her story was inspired by a newspaper article. So with this story, I'm humanizing her, helping people understand her motivations, her intentions, while shining a light on important social issues. Look, I believe in freedom of speech for everyone, but at the same time, you can't...
It does seem like everyone has an opinion on everything nowadays. There's no kindness or civility.
It's deliberate troublemaking. The internet is full of angry mobs attacking people.
To be frank, I've been attacked too, quite a few times. What impact do you think this is having on writers?
Well, we start to live in fear, don't we? And as a society, we used to respect writers.
Can I just say?
What are your thoughts on this, George? How do you feel about freedom of speech being under threat due to some people's sensitivities or ignorance? Now, George, I believe you're on mute. I think you need to press the button.
Oh, sorry, apologies. Yes, I agree. And I think kindness and civility, they're key. They're so important. People these days make out that melanins are all bad, that they're somehow against us. And I think it's attention seeking, frankly. I mean, of course, I'm not saying there isn't any racism. Of course there is. But I find it's usually amongst the really ignorant or uneducated melanins. And in my experience, most melanin people just want to help. And if people do have prejudices, then as non-melanated people, we have a responsibility to teach them. We need to show them that we're actually not so different after all.
Exactly, to reach across the divide instead of trying to get books banned.
Is the book really banned, though? Did it not just win the Looker?
It was a hard-earned win that came from years of learning the craft. I didn't just put on a milkmaid dress and start writing about being the manifestation of my grandmother's dreams or whatever that you write.
What are you trying to say?
That an essential respect for literature is under threat today. Look, a writer's job is to reveal deeper truths, not to pander to political correctness. It's kind of fascism. And mark my words, Jonathan, this will be the death of literature.
The real censorship is when people aren't free to say that they don't like the way they're being represented. Let's face it, Nikki, you're a lot more powerful than Amanda Jones or unknowns on social media.
I don't know about that, but it seems like the keyboard warriors are calling all the shots these days.
Maybe you and your friend are just annoyed at the fact that you can't control what's written about you anymore by pulling a few strings at the Custodian.
Now, Katie, that's not very kind.
Some of us have had enough of the negative representations, the stereotyping and cliches, and we've had enough of trying to explain how to do it better when it's our lives that are being appropriated. Why can't you just step aside and let us represent ourselves?
But wouldn't that be pandering to identity politics, giving platforms to people who have little qualification, talent, or skill apart from their race?
Are you actually saying that a melanin is better qualified than me to write about my life? Are you actually comparing me to somebody that's had all of the advantages? I mean, you were on the judging panel of a book, for fuck's sake, so we really have to ask, why on earth this is...
I'm not sure what happened there. It seems like we have a problem with Katie's audio. We'll sort that out straight away, but moving on. George, can you tell us a bit about your first novel?
Yeah, oh dear, technical difficulties. I started The Boy Who Couldn't Dance in my final year at Shoxford when I met a friend's mum at a party, Yomi Rodrigo. She's a publisher. She asked me what it was like growing up in a white family, if I had any stories to tell about my background, any struggles, the obstacles I'd gone through in my life. I told her, my life wasn't that interesting, but she wasn't having any of it. She convinced me that a person like me actually, has a lot to say, and she understood what it was like being brought up by parents who fed me a diet of bland food, who didn't let me mix with the wider world, and who never understood the importance of great literature.
So is the book autobiographical?
Not exactly. So The Boy Who Couldn't Dance is about Bob. He's a boy who fumbles his way through life. He goes through beer and dating, fish and chips, money. And then one day he sees that there's more out there, more to life. On the radio, he hears an old Beyonce song, and suddenly he finds his hips start to sway, his shoulders are going. This bit did actually happen to me. To the absolute horror of his parents, he decides to become a professional dancer, and that's what he ends up doing. My hope with the book is that it will inspire young people growing up in suffocating environments, just so they can see there's more out there, encourage them to go out and be free.
I learned so much from reading the book about communities that we don't always have access to. It felt almost like going on a trip abroad.
Can I ask a question, please?
Happy to have you back, Katie. Yeah, but if you could just wait for your turn, please.
Yeah, okay. By the way, George, these jives you're making at beer, fish and chips, white girls, Ed Sheeran, etc. What exactly is wrong with all of those things?
Katie, no, I think you're misunderstanding me. I don't have anything against traditional cultures.
Are you sure about that?
Katie. I mean, listen, I've paid my dues. Last week, I was in schools with young melanated children. We were exploring traditional white dress. We had the kids wearing flat caps, cardigans, socks and sandals. All of the good stuff.
Socks and sandals, spiffing.
Yeah. So I do my bit for the white community. Okay, but at the same time, we have to acknowledge the deep problems that exist in our communities too. Ghettoization, extremism, illiteracy, and ignorance. And I believe we can tackle these and appreciate the culture at the same time. You understand, I think, Jonathan, don't you?
100%, 100%. Everyone loves a cheeky jacket potato on a Friday night, don't they? Sometimes they even tell them to leave the salt out. You've probably noticed how many more beach writers there are now compared to when you were starting out. What do you think of this new wave, a new generation of emerging beach writers?
Well, to be honest, it can be frustrating sometimes being lumped together as if we're all the same. The truth is, I'm much more than just a beach.
Yeah, of course you are.
Excuse me?
Oh, you wouldn't want to be thought of as just a white writer now, would you?
Well, I don't mean it like that. I'm not a white writer. I'm just a writer. I'd much rather be compared to Dahlia Yusuf or Dylan Kingston or Ngugi Kiuna.
Who just happen to be melanins.
Well, they're successful writers who I really admire.
Yes, and in the end, we're all just human, aren't we?
George, you know,
Yeah.
Dahlia Yusuf and Dylan Kingston happen to be two of my closest friends.
Oh, wow, really?
I'll be sure to let them know how much you admire their work.
Oh, thank you, Nikki. Nikki, I really appreciate your support. It's great.
We hear you have a new book coming out, George.
Yeah. It's called Going Dutch. It's about a group of friends, and they're using this really out of date, archaic white tradition of splitting the bill at a restaurant, counting every penny, rather than adapting to modern times.
Going
That's what
Dutch
it's going for.
a beautiful practice. It represents the equality, freedom, and fairness at the heart of our culture. We have to stop carrying the shame.
I'm sorry, but celebrating everything that's white just because it's white is just another side of the same coin, isn't it?
Both important points. Beach writers have always been good at holding
By
on to
the way,
outdated traditions.
This term beach, I just want to say, it's really offensive. It's clearly a reference to our skin colour, like we're sand-coloured or washed out. Don't you think it's a little bit racist? And it doesn't even make sense. I mean, white people don't originally come from Australia and America, and habitants, well, that's clearly just been put there for sake of having a word beginning with A.
Thank you, Katie, for that opinion. Something to think about. But please do tweet about this event, Katie, if you haven't already. Now, moving on. I would be amiss if I didn't ask about the terrifying developments we're seeing in our world. The acts of terrorism, the violence, the drunkenness, debauchery being carried out in a widespread, some say covert and planned way across the UK and the world. How do you respond to these actions, George?
Jonathan, I wholeheartedly condemn them. These acts are not representative of us as a people.
Of course, but why aren't more white people speaking up and condemning this?
Well, many of us are. There are all kinds of initiatives being started by those of us who are peace-loving, those of us who are moderate. We want to reassure people. So, for example, there's the really worthy Dance with a White Person initiative, which I was actually a part of.
And why do you think that so many white people are following this path?
Yeah, I think it's a kind of brainwashing, a toxic mindset. I've seen it happen in my community to people I know, certainly. And as I show in my novels, this can actually happen really easily when you alienate yourself from the world around you.
Can I just say, George, we've introduced your first book into our curriculum at Oxford.
Gosh, really?
Yes.
It's great.
Yeah. We're also going to be introducing a new module on marginalised voices, and we've also introduced Sebastian Aubrey's first novel, Homeless.
Oh, great. That novel was a really big inspiration for me. Definitely. It's great.
Yeah. In fact, we are hoping to have Sebastian as our guest speaker at the inaugural lecture for the launch of the scholarship.
Oh, wow. We look forward to that, Ella. Now, unfortunately, we need to bring things to a close. I would love to invite the panel to share some closing comments before we open up to questions. Nikki, can we start with you?
All I want to say is that diversity is important, but let's not sacrifice literature for it. Let's not forget freedom of expression. Let's not forget that every society needs its thinkers and writers. We can't be like them, the racists, the fascists, the right-wingers, burning and banning books, canceling writers. We're the civilized ones. We talk, we discuss, we write our own books.
That's just magnificent. You are an inspiration to us all. Beauty and brains. The perfect woman.
So creepy. I'm sorry, but you would not say that to a man. Men like you should not be given a panel. I mean...
We seem to have lost Katie. Anyway, thank you, Nikki. Ella, do you have any closing comments?
Can I just say, it's always fun doing events with writers. Much more interesting than academics. No, I would just like to say, if you or anyone would like to take part in the Writing Back Scholarship, then do get in touch with my secretary. You'll find our details on the website.
Bilal?
I would just urge everyone to support minority voices wherever you can. It's the least we can do. Send them any suitable opportunities. Help a non-melanated person to write an application. Find a publisher, support them financially. Ask them their story. Don't believe the news coverage. We all have to change the narrative together.
Amen to that.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
And George?
Just thanks. Thanks for the opportunity. It's a real honor to be here. I'm very grateful for the invitation. Well, I'll just take the opportunity for some shameless self-promotion, if that's okay. Going Dutch will be released next week. You can buy advanced copies. Like Bilal said, just please do your bit to support diversity.
Thank you, George. Now, sadly, we seem to have lost Katie, technical difficulties. We have some time to open to the audience now. Does anyone have any questions? If you just flag up that you have a question in the chat, and I'll ask you to unmute yourselves and put on your video. One has just come through from Malia. Go ahead, Malia.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for that super interesting talk. I really enjoyed it. George and Nikki, I am a big fan. George, that scene in your novel when Bob is he's let go of all of his stuff and he's on that stage dancing, it really moved me. It made me cry.
Oh, amazing.
And
thank you.
Nikki, my question is actually for Nikki. I wanted to ask you, in this very male-dominated industry, how do you, as a woman, kind of hold on to your strength and self-belief?
I think what the questioner is trying to ask is if you have any thoughts, Nikki, on the difficulties of writing as a woman. You've always seemed so competent and focused, more than any man that I know.
Thanks for that question. Of course, I strongly believe that women should be pushing past all the barriers and boundaries. But I've never personally experienced that kind of self-doubts before. Maybe because I have such a supportive, encouraging father. The only thing that I would say that has been troubling is how often I'm accused of using my looks to get ahead. That just infuriates me.
Your mind is what I find delightful, in all honesty, Nikki.
Well, I think, as a woman, we shouldn't give into this idea that we have it any more difficult than men. If we buy into that belief, well, that's what will manifest. In reality, if your work is good, you'll have the same opportunities as any man, if not more, quite frankly.
Thanks, Nikki, for that bold response. Any more questions? There's a lot of questions coming through for Katie, but I'm afraid she's no longer with us. Anyone else?
There seems to be someone, Tom, who's trying to ask a question.
Yes. All right. Do you want to introduce yourself, Tom? Tom, as many of us know, is the founder of Critical Voices and has been publishing and writing for some time now.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Bilal, actually. You direct and publish White Voices at Cup of Tea, yeah? But do you employ any white people to publish, to edit or direct? Because as far as I know, your team is completely melanated.
Yes, it's a good point. We did have an intern earlier this year, but it's not easy to find people with the interest and that level of skill and experience. It will take time.
If you employed a white person, then they might have told you that in your authentic play, the characters, dialogue, home setting, and even the names sound made up. I mean, Tooney.
We now have a native dramaturg working on the play to iron out some of the inconsistencies. Of course, everything in the play is true coming out of our research, but we had to change some of the superficial things to make it work as a play.
And it really did work. I can attest to that. Now, any more questions? Yes, Onkita.
Hi. Thank you so much for that wonderful discussion. I really enjoyed it. My question is, with all the interest in diversity these days, with it being trendy and all, do you think that some melanins might start feeling like their stories are not interesting or valuable? Like, I'm a melanated writer, and I definitely feel like there's been a decrease in opportunities ever since diversity became so popular.
Thank you. Now, that's a good question. What do you think, Nikki?
It's a valid concern, to be honest with you. I mean, no offense to DOFs, but sometimes I do feel that these diversity schemes have gone too far. I mean, frankly, it seems like if a blonde, blue-eyed person walks into Paris Press these days, well, they get a book deal straight away. No questions asked. But I would say, and Kita, was it? Keep trying, keep writing. And like you said, it's worth remembering that this might be just a trend. Real literature, it's more enduring.
Does anyone want to add to that?
Well, I disagree, obviously. I think the whole problem is that there are only spaces for melanin voices. And with this work, we're trying to correct an imbalance. That's why our doors are always open to beaches with something to say. Just the other day, I told my Uber driver that I'd love to tell his story, and he was more than eager.
Fascinating. Any more questions? Anyone else? It would be good to get someone different. Okay, yes, Tom. Just to clarify, we're looking for questions, not comments, not opinions or personal experiences, and please don't be offended if I cut you off. It's for the purposes of time and relevance. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, my question is for Ms. Savenzo.
Professor Savenzo, I'm sorry, but I get quite tired of people who struggle to accept the fact that I'm a professor. Worked quite hard to acquire this title.
I'm sorry, Professor Savenzo. You mentioned that you're putting Sebastian Aubrey's novel on your curriculum.
Homeless. Yes.
Yeah, you do realise that Sebastian Aubrey's an aristocrat, don't you?
Is he?
You can kind of tell from his name, can't you? But his parents own a golf course. He went to Sheaton and Shoxford. What does he know about being homeless?
Well, I don't think there's any need for us to be so reductive. I don't think it matters what the background of the writer is. I mean, your novel, George, Going Dutch, that's partially based in Holland, isn't it?
Kind of. It's really the name of the custom. The title's a play on that. If you see what I mean.
If we were only expected to write what we experience, then we wouldn't have a very interesting canon now, would we?
Exactly. Just because I'm not white doesn't mean I can't write about Caucasian people.
Yeah, no. My point was that Aubrey's novel is it's just offensive on every level. And it's ridiculous that mainstream publishers aren't interested when we write honestly about our own lives, but when someone like you, Nikki, when you write about us, about white people, then you're celebrated for doing it, and we're all supposed to be grateful. And you know, it's fine, right? It's fine if you want to write about white characters, but you need to work a bit harder. Do your research. I mean, newspaper articles. If you don't face your own prejudices, then of course they'll just be reproduced in your work.
I'm sorry, but I didn't come here today to be attacked. Okay, first that girl, and it's like no matter what you do, it's never enough. If you don't write about white characters, well, they criticize you. And if you do write about them, well, they still criticize you. In fact, the more successful you get, the more people try to bring you down. And sometimes it's just too much.
Look, I wasn't trying to say that you shouldn't write.
They think just because I'm melanin, just because someone that looks like me might have been involved in the oppression of someone that looks like them, that I should pay for. Gosh, that's so unfair.
No, I was only talking about the right-wing newspaper article you based your white character on.
Are you saying that I'm a racist after all that I've done?
No, of course not. I'm sorry. I'm not attacking you. It's just that if you're putting books into the public space, making a career, making money, then you can't expect that no one will call you out on it.
Melanins have feelings too, you know?
Okay, I'm sorry, that really is enough. I mean, how accommodating can one be? Are you okay, darling? Do you need us to take a little break?
Oh, I'm fine, Jonathan. Thank you. Don't worry about me.
All right. Now, are there any more questions before we wrap up?
Can I just say, Tom, I find your point of view compelling, an urgent intrusion. I really value what you have to say and the way you say it. We would love to showcase your voice at our company.
Frankly, Bilal, I'm not looking to be commodified into a product like George or Katie. And it's interesting, isn't it, that she's disappeared off of here, isn't it? Eh?
Oh, right. Thank you for that. Moving on. Any more questions before we run out of time?
Sorry, Jonathan, can I just respond to Tom there?
All right.
Thank you. So I've known Tom for a while. As it happens, Tom published my first short story. God, I think I was barely 20 at the time. Look, regarding this remark about me being commodified or whatever it was, so, okay, it's not the first time I've heard this, I have to say. And mate, you have to understand, you're not doing yourself any favors by being so emotional. And then always complaining that things are bad, that we're shut out. You have to, roll up your sleeves. You've got to get involved. You've got to adapt. You can't wait until things are perfect first. I'm not stupid, and I'm not a sellout. I mean, do you know how hard I've had to work to get where I am today?
Where are you?
Well, I mean, I'm on this panel for a start.
Well, as if that's some kind of achievement.
Well, of course it is. Of course it's an honor. Look, I'm out here. I've had some success, and people care about what I have to say. That means something. Okay, you can't tell me that it doesn't. And okay, yeah, sometimes I put a certain spin on things. Audiences like hearing about drunkenness and poor dancing skills, but those are real problems too. I didn't make them up. I actually was a bad dancer before I met melanins. But that's not the point. Look, we've got to survive. We have to thrive, ideally. And if you'd seen my mum's face the day I was on Oprah, and I don't know, maybe that's why I write. And it's really tough when you feel your own people turning against you. Really hard.
Thank you, George. Thank you. Surely you'd agree, though, there is no your own people. We are all one, after all.
Yeah, of course.
It seems we've now lost Tom as well. Must be due to the patchy internet in the areas where Katie and Tom live. But no matter. I actually think this might be a good time to wrap up. We'll post some details down below, and do follow, like, subscribe, etc. if you'd like to do your bit for diversity. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you once more to our panel. Now, this conversation is the last event in our calendar to mark White History Month. We hope to see you all next year when we do it all again. Thank you and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.